Macabre book provides a keyhole into the monster's mind. Well, it's just come out now. Death Scenes, a homicide detective scrapbook, text by Catherine Dunn. Something I can't really post on YouTube. It's just too graphic, too grisly. But this certainly provides us with an interesting insight into Rex Heuermann, the imputed Long Island serial killer.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello from Thousand Oaks in California, Southern California. Welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. So news just out. It's just come out on Fox News shortly before New York police made a surprise return to the Long Island home of Rex Heuermann. His family was still in possession of a gruesome album of crime scene photos. That's according to a source with knowledge of the incident. The book in question, Death Scenes, a homicide detective scrapbook. Now, just judging from the cover of that book, it's not something you could really put onto YouTube. You probably get all sorts of warnings and issues and problems. It's just very grisly and very graphic. And so the book is a collection of strange and gruesome crime scene photos taken by California detective Jack Huddleston, and was allegedly spotted on a kitchen table in the home where Heuermann's estranged wife, Asa Ellerup, lives with her two adult children. I'm not sure if she's still living there, but it certainly reminds one of the John Benet Ramsey case, where books were also seen in the house, or certainly photographed in the house, only to disappear later on. And then there was kind of a uncertainty about whether the book existed at all. Of course, the book did exist because they were reported and documented in crime scene photos and in different police statements. And so this is the same kind of situation. This particular book, what was it doing in the house? And, this development raises the question of whether Asa had absolutely no idea what was going on with her husband, or whether she ought to have had some idea, whether she ought to have seen some clues of deviant behavior. The fact that this book was out on the kitchen table and not buried in some dungeon speaks volume, pun intended. In any event, Ellerup's lawyer, Bob Macedonia, says he had no knowledge of the book. The question really is whether Asa had knowledge of it, or whether the kids had knowledge of it. I have long been a proponent of Heuermann's sadism being seated in feelings of insufficiency, insignificance, and ultimately feelings of impotency. I get the feeling folks, especially in the areas of Long Island, can't get over their own feelings. So when you bring this up, they can't get over how this reflects on them. And so they can't really look into the Heuermann case as a case of its own, on its own terms, if I can put it that way. And so because people see how it reflects on them, they can't begin to deal with Heuermann. That's not really how we like to work in true crime. We like to focus on the perpetrator, not see everything through prisms of our own context and circumstances, not see how things make us feel, but try to see reality the way it is. And once you've finalized constructing that, once you've assessed and synthesized what actually happened, then you can take that and come back to yourself and say, oh, I'm a lot like that, or I'm not a lot like that, or this is like my situation, or it's not. But in the process of putting together a profile, you don't put yourself in the middle of that. You don't make yourself the prism through which you decide whether something is appropriate or not. And I see a lot of that in true crime and in true crime creators. We don't allow the evidence to guide us. We allow our own biases really to guide us, even when we say we're not. So I have tried to make it explicit, this idea of living in a small ramshackle house in the shadow of the great glittering city and being forever caught in a sort of limbo between these extremes. And I was actually on a flight reading an in-flight magazine when I found an article on John Bon Jovi, who spoke about growing up in Jersey and described the shadow of the great city. So I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. It's just what it is. But what it is really a sense of wannabeing. And I know what that's like. You know, I come from a country outside of America, and I want to be in America. It's not something to feel strange about. It's a very common human impulse. But in terms of Heuermann, the sadism is how the psychology finds a way out of this geographical and economic helplessness. In a symbolic sense, by inflicting cruel and unusual punishment on others, this soothes, assuages, or abates his own feelings, and with it come feelings of potency, of power. The trouble is, none of it is real. Gaining some sort of power through sexual sadism is fleeting. The relief may be real, but it doesn't last. Once the impulse passes, reality returns only for one to find oneself still locked into the original status quo. In other words, you haven't changed anything. Some of what we're dealing with here comes up in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Underneath the great man and beneath the great exterior is a sad story of an invisible human being who feels himself to be inferior. And guess what? That tends to be, in some shape or form, the story of all of us. Who we project ourselves to be is not quite as great or grand as the sort of humdrum person, kind of at ground level. Think about Elvis Presley, the great Elvis Presley, who died on his throne being a toilet. That was how he came to his end. Often behind the great man is a meat and potatoes reality. And so in terms of Heuermann, well, let's go back to Gatsby. How Gatsby changes this feeling of being invisible is he finds symbols to attach himself to. And all of us do the same thing. We attach ourselves to a certain kind of car, a certain kind of house in a certain suburb. And all of that tells people what kind of people we are. Is it the kind of person we are? For Gatsby, it was a great castle and parties and a green light. For Heuermann, the castle was always somewhere else, but somehow he translated the struggle for parody into his sexual identity. By debasing his victims, he could achieve a fleeting sense of supremacy, at least over someone. Unfortunately, we cannot hope to understand Heuermann's psychology without at least acknowledging some of these baser motives in ourselves. In this sense, we are all in denial, and rightly so, because we all have the capacity of becoming monsters. The route to that door is quite simple. Take away someone's agency, all of it, and then see what they do. See how they cope, see how they rationalize. Most people cannot abide their own sense of insignificance and will cheat, lie, steal, fabricate in some way, exaggerate in some way, manipulate in some way, in some cases murder, in order to avoid the living death that is an unlived or not fully experienced or validated life. This feeling of being caught in a cage, and you can't reach your full potential. Feels like you're in a prison even though you're alive. And so the way out of this impasse is to accept the vicissitudes of reality and the finitudes of fate, rather than to invent fairy tales or fictions to circumvent them. In other words, by creating fairy tales or fictions to deal with reality, we simultaneously create nightmares. In order to not create nightmares, we must not create fairy tales. That's a tough assignment given the culture we belong to, which is basically built on fairy tales. Who we are, our characters are fairy tales as well. So how do you not create a fairy tale? Well, by being real, by living in the real world, by being authentic. Are we not, just as we are, sufficiently armored to simply live our lives? Well, as social animals, not if others say we are not, and if we believe them. Are we strong enough to say who we are, even if others don't see or believe who we are? This is why being authentic matters, being able to validate ourselves authentically, but even more so, authentic in an adaptive sense, not merely to the reality of what people think and believe, but to reality with a capital R, but to adaptive to reality itself. Thank you for listening. I hope you guys found this interesting, and I'll see you guys next time.